Joining me now is Jeff Clements. He's the founder and president of American Promise. They're trying to help save democracy, and they've got an interesting new letter that they have revealed to help do that. Jeff, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks, Cenk. Good to see you.
Great to see you, brother. So I want to talk about how in a second, because that's super important. But first, let's talk about the letter. So you guys have put this out. What's in it, and who signed it?
Well, as you know, millions of Americans have called for a constitutional amendment over the last several years to get big money out of politics, put power back in the hands of the people. And what was significant about this letter on Constitution Day, actually, just a week or two ago, was that 50 of the top legal scholars in the country, former judges across the partisan spectrum, signed on to say we must get this amendment done. The Supreme Court was wrong to strike down the campaign finance laws, empower corporations and money as sort of free speech, and that we had to get an amendment to overturn it. Now, of course, most Americans already know that, but when you have former judges and law professors like Larry Tribe and Zephyr Teachout and Republicans, former John McCain advisor Trevor Potter, all saying we need this amendment, it's pretty significant.
Larry Lessig and so many other acclaimed law professors saying it. Jeff, you don't know this, but this is like my dad's dream come true. He always tells me like, why the professors don't get together and say this is the reality? And so here it is.
Yeah, exactly. Your dad was right on.
And so it's true. And as I've been saying lately, it's the corruption, stupid. And so now with these professors and legal scholars leading the way, saying, no, your eyes aren't lying to you. It actually is deeply problematic and hurts democracy. And the rulings of the Supreme Court made no sense that they're human beings who have speech rights. That means they could buy off politicians. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court being what it is, you need an amendment to go above their heads. So, and Jeff is one of the great fighters on that. So now, Jeff, now the hard questions. How? So is there any headway in getting any kind of amendment on this issue through Congress?
Well, the how is you're right, the big question, the hard question, and constitutional amendments don't happen every day. But here's what's significant: in times of turmoil, disruption, breakdown, corruption, amendments actually come in bunches. And so, we did 4 amendments between 1962 and 1971. We did the post-Civil War amendments. We did 4 amendments in the Progressive Era. So the question is, are we in an amendment moment in our country? And I think there's no question we are. We see the disruption, we see the breakdown, we see the corruption, and we either do this or we lose democracy. And so the how is the American people sticking together, rising up to do the really hard work it takes to win a constitutional amendment. But that's why women vote. It's why we elect senators. So many things we take for granted now were done by people just like us winning the constitutional amendment. Now, the technical answer, of course, is, and I think what you're alluding to, Jack, is, 27 amendments won a vote in Congress by 2/3. That's what it takes, 2/3 of the Congress to propose an amendment. As you've said before, Jack, there's another way to propose an amendment, and that's a convention called by 2/3 of the states for the purpose of proposing an amendment. And we're seeing today just what we saw in those other times of need in this country: Americans deciding, all right, which method am I going to hammer at? Am I going to hammer at Congress, or am I going to go around Congress and push for a convention? That's part of the dynamic. And I'm confident that, whether Congress or a convention propose this amendment, it's going to happen. Not in 20 years, it's going to happen in this decade. And Congress is either going to propose it or get out of the way, and the people are going to go around them. But, I think usually in the past, Congress has seen the light when the people do their job. And I think that's what we're starting to see. And I think Congress will see the light, and it'll be it's always impossible until it's inevitable. And I think we're nearing inevitable in the next few years.
Yeah, so let me agree with Jeff on a number of counts here. First off, they do come in bunches, and people say like, "Oh, it's impossible." Well, then how come we did 27 of them? Right? I don't think you understand what the word impossible means, right? And yes, it's usually when people either through a convention or other means put pressure on Congress to do it. Obviously, I believe in putting that pressure on by going the convention route, and that's what Wolfpack does, wolf-pack.com. American Promise is in favor of both routes, all routes. For God's sake, let's get the amendment. And I totally agree with that, Jeff, and you do wonderful work there. And so let's focus on Congress for a second, though, because on the show we've talked a lot about the convention path, and Wolfpack's already got put 5 on the board, and I think we can do that. But have you run into anyone, and this part I don't know the answer to this, and it could get a little dispiriting, but we need to have honest conversations about it. Have you found anyone that has, at this point, a credible pathway to getting 2/3 of Congress to call for an amendment? Again, either way, either Congress or the states are proposing an amendment. 3/4 of the states have to ratify it anyway. But we're talking about Congress proposing an amendment, and it takes 2/3 of them to do that. Have you talked to someone who says, oh yeah, but if we do this, and then that leads to that?
Yeah, I've talked to this guy, Jeff Clements, president of American Promise. So
great, what is it?
So I believe, just like the other amendments, however people decide to push this forward, Congress in the end will vote by 2/3 to propose an amendment, and they'll either do it to prevent a convention from being necessary, or they'll do it because we get 2/3. Now, look, we have all of the Democrats, and that in some ways makes it harder to get the Republicans who actually want to be with us on this on board. But we've got the independents, Angus King, a moderate senator from Maine, on board. Now, obviously, the question is, where are the Republican votes going to come from? And I don't think anyone who thinks Congress is going to propose this thinks it will be this Congress. I think, 3 years in a tumultuous time is a long time in American politics. And I haven't talked to anyone who thinks the Congress in 2022 or 3 is going to look like the Congress of today. And so the question is, what are we doing to make the Congress of 2022, 2023 ready to vote 2/3 on this? And so I think we'll see, obviously we'll need a different Senate majority leader. Mitch McConnell is not going to move this forward in the Senate. But we see Republicans getting on board. John Katko, an upstate New York Republican, thanks to the hard work of people pushing for this amendment around the country, led and joined Ted Deutsch and Jamie Raskin and Jim McGovern, progressives, in introducing the amendment in the House. I think we can earn the support of people like Lisa Murkowski, maybe even Susan Collins in the Senate. But again, it has to be from the states, it has to be their constituents, and they have to have no choice to get behind this or face defeat. And I think that's the kind of dynamic that's beginning to play out. Wolfpack does tremendous work. It's very important that we don't leave any tool in the tool shed, and the energy that Wolfpack brings to this, and we work with them in many states, and hope to see them at our National Citizen Leadership Conference in a couple of weeks. But that's all part of the process. So it's okay if you don't buy the theory that Congress is ever going to get behind it, and you're working with your fellow Americans to propose an amendment in a convention. That's great. The only inexcusable thing is to do nothing and then give yourself a pass by saying, "No, Congress won't do it. Oh, and the convention's too hard." So I think that the dynamics are playing out. We'll get 67 Senate votes, 290 House votes, and we'll be on our way.
And so, look, I want to give people a little bit of hope because, first of all, part of the reason why the first and only litmus test that Just Democrats had was no corporate PAC money was because our thesis is that if you have clean, uncorrupted politicians, they're going to vote for an amendment immediately. So why would you want other politicians being bribed when you're not being bribed? Right? I mean, it's just logic, right? And if you're not taking the bribes, then that's not your source of power. The votes are your source of power. So I think that if you support not just Democrats, but anyone not taking corporate PAC money, including, by the way, Republicans, if they exist, and they do, and I'll tell you about that in a second, that's going to lead to clean politicians that are much more likely to clean up the system altogether. And yes, don't give up hope. Yes, at the national level, Mitch McConnell has led the Republicans off a cliff and saying, no, legalized bribery is excellent, the American people love it. The reality is not only do American people hate it, Republican voters hate it more than Democratic voters. And I say that based on polling. And anecdotally, when Wolfpack goes door to door, Republican voters hate the corruption. They hate Soros money, they hate Bloomberg money, they hate all the money that's bribing the politicians, right? And now Wolfpack just had their workshop for leaders just last weekend. I was at it in Dallas. Bunch of Republicans in the room, and there's a very conservative legislator in Texas who's leading the movement down there. So look, whether it's wolf-pack.com or americanpromise.net, you got to get in the fight, because this is definitely possible. And believe it or not, Republican voters are actually very animated about this. We just got to push them to let their politicians know where they stand and insist on it. Otherwise, throw the bums out. But last thing, Jeff, real quick, what would be in the amendment?
Well, the constitutional amendment has to do a couple of key things. Number one, we have to get our power back as the American people, with the ones who decide who goes to represent us. And the only way to do that is to have limits on the power of money in our political system. So Congress and the states and we the people and our ballot initiatives and at every level need to be able to make the rules about keeping big money out of elections. And I think the idea that, a corporation, a big global corporation, no matter how huge, no matter how international, is just like a person with free speech, that's unsustainable. That has to change. The constitutional amendment will do that. So there's some really good proposals. Consensus is building. The amendment needs to have limits on the power of money in the political system. We need to be equal citizens, not have our power allocated based on wealth. And we need to be human beings and citizens, not big global corporations calling the shots.
Look, even Tucker Carlson's talking about how big global corporations are crushing the average American worker, and that's because the Republican base is actually on our side on this. This is the only thing that the whole country agrees on. It's the one thing that unites us. It's the corruption, stupid. So we got to get together to fight it. And Jeff's done a great job of bringing the law professors from all different stripes across the political spectrum to get together and say, yes, this is true. It is a real problem and there is a way to fix it, and it's an amendment. Everybody check out americanpromise.net. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us on the Young Turks. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Cenk. Great to be with you. Take care.
You too. Two easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below. Then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.